am your host, Jay Poole, and this is Potstirrer Podcast. Welcome to Potstirrer Podcast, where politics, religion, and history collide, and it's not always polite. Today, we have a very special guest. Allison K. Garcia is a licensed professional counselor with a passion for writing. She is a member of Shenandoah Valley Writers, Virginia Writers Club, and is municipal liaison for Shenandoah Valley NaNoWriMo. Latina at heart, Allison has absorbed the love and culture of her friends and family and has used her experiences to cast a glimpse into the journey of undocumented Christians. She is a highly decorated author who has written the novels Vivir el Dream and Finding Amor. The novella Navidad en Familia, featured in the 2018 box set A Merry Navidad, as well as a number of engaging short stories. Allison has been on the show before, and each time has been a great experience. I have enjoyed it, and I know many of you have enjoyed these conversations as well. Allison is returning today to discuss her upcoming book, Finding Seguridad, which is highly anticipated. Welcome back, Allison.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm excited that you're here. So let's jump right in.
All right.
Before we jumped on, you had said that you described your books as stories of love, hope, and faith for marginalized Christians. From having read your work, I think that makes perfect sense. Now, for you, when you say this, what does that description encompass? What does that mean to you?
Well, I think for me, I have been just as my journey as a Christian, as I've been growing as a Christian, I've just been learning about, I think, the way Christianity has been viewed in America and sometimes in the world, and the way what Christian, quote unquote Christian means in kind of the popular mainstream way, and how that actually has left out a whole bunch of people, which is kind of the opposite of the gospel. When I think it's Paul that has that dream, it's either Peter or Paul, it's one of the P's. He has that dream that said where he sees kind of like a heavenly host or something, and he realizes there's no longer man nor woman, nor clean or unclean food, etc., etc. And that was like, yes, now the Gentiles can be part of the kingdom as well. And so the entire purpose of Jesus coming for everybody, not just those who were quote unquote chosen from way back. And so I think when I think of marginalized Christians, I think about that's how it started, that's how things started. Jesus went to those who were marginalized. He visited those who were in prison, the people that were viewed as lepers, or they were literal lepers, I guess. But nowadays it'd be people that are viewed as lepers. Women who were, looked down upon in society, even unclean women, people from places where there were rivalry with the Jews, like the Samaritans, for example. That was his mission. He sat down with people who were viewed as sinners. And I think that is the main story of the gospel from my point of view is love and loving everyone. And what I've been learning as I've been growing as a Christian is that I feel like we've gotten to a place where we're, as a quote-unquote Christian, as in the mainstream Christian, we're leaving out everybody, and that's the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. And I feel like right now, with everything, with the way the country is crazily divided, and the way people are clinging on to things and calling themselves Christians, and it's so not Christian at all. It's the opposite of the gospel, and yet they're clinging on to it as some kind of ghost of the past or something that's not even relevant to what Christianity actually is. And so I feel almost like the people that are marginalized in Christianity are maybe the ones that are living out the gospel more. And so I kind of want to highlight that and be like, hey, this is, we're going in the wrong direction, mainstream Christianity. Let's look outward, stop looking inward, look outward to the margins, to where people are. That's what Jesus did. He went out to the margins of society, and he said that was like the one sheep. He went out and he saw it, and he brought back to them. I don't know. And so that's just kind of when I think of marginalized Christians, just as a kind of a explanation of in my head. I think people of color are currently marginalized. I think the LGBTQ community is marginalized. I think people that speak different languages are marginalized, and people with disabilities, mental health issues. Gosh, like it could just be anything. Anyone whose views is different, really. Kind of if you don't fit that, if you don't fit that white Christian, kind of almost middle class, but it could be lower middle class, you're viewed as on the outside, looking in, and that's really not at all what the gospel's about.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I think one of the things that I've talked about a lot in my work is, because I tend to focus a lot on white evangelicalism, just because that's sort of my religious background.
Yeah.
And I think there's that relationship to power, where it's like there's that desire for power, or to sort of retain power, just because historically, sort of like that dominant white evangelical tradition has had political power. And I think especially with marginalized groups being more vocal in our society, and now like we're hearing more from people of color and from the LGBTQ plus community, and a lot of these different groups that were not heard in the past. And I think it's, in a sense, maybe it's threatening. And so there is that desire to, to kind of be exclusive and to be like, okay, that's them and this is us kind of thing.
Right. And I think that's exactly one of the reasons why Jesus came. And that's what was happening with the Jews. There were all these laws, all these things you had to follow. And what it was just keeping themselves in and then other people out. And even like casting out people in their own thing. And it was all about guilt. The message was being missed, I think, greatly. Mm-hmm. And so I've just been, I'm kind of in a stage of, in my new church, they've talked about, we had this whole sermon series on like deconstruction and reconstruction of your faith, where you're learning new things, and either you totally reject the new stuff, or sometimes you want to just toss out you chuck everything, throw out the baby with the bathwater, and you chuck everything that you knew, and you're like, no, that's not true. I'm just going to take on this new thing. But really, like taking with reconstruction, deconstructing and reconstructing your faith, you look at what you have and like the experiences you've gained, and you take what you want, and you kind of drop the stuff that's no longer true or doesn't hold true for you anymore. And that's kind of where I am right now, and I think that's what probably makes me marginalized. I've dropped a lot of some of the old things that I believed, because I read more things, and I opened my mind, and I learned that was not true. That wasn't really, those were things that were not accurate. That's not what the gospel's about.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. And this kind of flows into my next question.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something I think about sometimes. And when I'm talking to fellow creatives, this is something I like to ask them, like whether they're writers or podcasters or just any type of content creator. So I think a huge part of growth as a creative is time and life experience. So, for example, I can look at who I was when I first started Potstirrer Podcast back in 2017, and like what the podcast looked like. And there have been changes over time to both the podcast and for myself on my end, like wrestling with my Christian faith, and sort of like what you were talking about with your new church, the deconstructing and reconstructing, wrestling with that, with what my faith looks like, and figuring out what that looks like at this point in my life. What does it mean for me to say like, okay, I'm a Christian?
Right.
And then as far as for my podcast, truly finding my voice when it comes to the podcast and refining over time the reasons why I'm doing this. So my question for you is, when you think about the evolution of your work and yourself as a content creator, from your early works to the writing process for finding Seguridad.
Yeah.
Like, how do you think your work has evolved, and how do you think that you've evolved as an author and as a person?
Well, I love this question. So because I have evolved greatly, I think I've come a long way since I started writing. And I've written since I was little. Like, I can't remember a time in my life when I wasn't writing. Obviously I've grown since I could write when I was 6 or something, and I was thinking about this just the other day about how my view had changed from when I first wrote Finding Amor back in 2014, and then when I started editing it in 2018. And gosh, I think when I wrote it in 2014, I had the first draft during NaNoWriMo. I had this vision in my head, which I think like never quite sat right with me, where I had, and if anybody has read Finding Amor, go and read it, and there's going to be spoilers, obviously, because there's book 2 here, right here.
Yes,
so if you don't want any
spoilers,
spoilers, stop listening now, read the book, and go back and finish this podcast. But like, originally, in the original first draft of Finding Amor, Carlos was redeemed. The experience where he almost froze to death outside, he realized that he could change, and somehow magically the church helped with that. Somehow, it was just like all fine and dandy because he had Jesus, and that was sort of based on just this couple that I knew where it had been like a domestic violence situation, I think, and he had stopped using drugs and drinking, and he was, he had kind of reformed and been redeemed. And I was like, wow, that's really great, like, because that never happens. And so, like, flash forward to when I start editing it, like, I didn't touch it for years, for 4 years I didn't touch it. Because when I would read it, I was like, and then I didn't capture why that was until like 2018, when I sat down with it, and I was, talking to my editor, and I was like, should I just scrap this? Like, it doesn't feel right. And I felt like in my head, I started thinking like, this is perpetuating domestic violence just by writing it in this way. Stay with the person and he will change, or she will change. And I was like, I don't feel good about that. That doesn't feel right. Like, there's something that doesn't feel right about that. And so she was like, I forget what she had said, and I had it in my acknowledgments of my first of Finding Amor, but she pretty much was like, pray about it, and kind of, I forget exactly. She said wonderful things, and I quoted it, and now I don't remember. So that's what I did. Like, on the way home from dropping off my son at my mom's, on the way to work, I prayed, and God gave me this other story. This story about Anna and Emmanuel and Carlos, where she recognized that it was a dangerous situation, and she left. They escape with their life. That's the end of book 1. That's the end of the Buscando Home series. That's the end of book 1, the end of Finding Amor. And so when you start finding Seguridad, that's what's happening. They're running. They're running for their lives. They're afraid that he is going to wake up and come find them and kill them. And that's how the book starts, with just this immense fear. And, and then it progresses throughout books 2, and then there's going to be, book 3 is already written in first draft form, so not able to be viewed at this point. Still very, very loosely written, but it's not at all like the original Finding Amor was going to be, and part of it was, as I was like doing the work for Finding Amor, as I was editing it, and then in 2019, when I started to have my revelations about my life and where I was, and what was wrong, and what was going on, and this whole revelation that I had, I realized, as I had written book 3, and as I was going and giving talks about for finding amor, I realized that it was part of my process as just me, realizing that I myself was in a domestic violence situation, that I myself was in an abusive marriage that I needed to get out of, that it was not a healthy space for me. And in a way, I was like Anna, and I had always identified kind of with Lauren because of the infertility stuff, which I went through for a lot of years before I had my son. But as I was reading and editing and writing, I realized that was me. And originally, like in 2014, when I wrote it, I had the things I had been learning from my church, my old church. The man is the head of the household, and you need to stick with it even if it's not good. And if you just pray enough, if you just believe enough, things will change. If he just comes to church, if all this garbage, that they teach people, that was being fed to me, that was keeping me in this relationship that was very dangerous and not good. And as I was coming out of that and realizing I need to leave this situation, this is not a good, healthy situation for me, I have to get out of this, I think that editing and working on my books and kind of realizing that I could leave this situation, that this was unhealthy, that the ideas that were being fed to me, that those were not the truth. And I had known that as a counselor for a lot of years, that I had even labeled it in my head as emotional abuse for a lot of years. And I didn't. I just had this hope, and that's what keeps people in, is you just hope that it won't, things will get better, that things will be fine, that's not really, it's just because he's working too hard or something like that. And it's not true, but it's common to feel like that. And so for me, seeing Anna escape and leave and writing that, I think it was God's way of being like, hey, you can do this. This is a thing you can do. And, I was able to leave, and it was a scary circumstance, because I realized when I talked to my, there's 2 things. One, I also, in that same time, since we're putting all the cards on the table, at the same time, I realized that I had done a lot of journaling and realized that also that I'm gay. So that's that was also a huge thing that in the church that I was in, was, a sin, and meant that I was sinning and all this stuff. And when I went to my pastor and my pastor's wife, and told them, they pretty much were really afraid that I was going to hell, and wanted me to go to these church meetings, pretty much, I think, to pray the gay away. They formed a committee to talk to me about the biblical truths. And when I told them that I didn't want to do that, and that they needed to not talk to, because they said they were going to talk to my ex-husband, mm-hmm. and tell him that I, was planning to leave him. And I said that could be dangerous for both me and my child, because I know the rates of homicides in the highest rate of homicides, domestic violence, is when the woman hasn't left yet and ends up getting killed. And I said that could put us in danger. And they said, well, that's how it is. I guess we could maybe we could wait until you leave before we talk to him about you being gay. So they were going to out me to him and also tell them that I was planning to leave. And I thought they were more willing to let me and my son possibly get murdered rather than believe a new thing, to believe a new truth. They're holding on to these patriarchal ideas that were incorrectly written in the Bible, and they were willing to just let that happen, because of what they believed in, and how misguided is that, and dangerous for so many people. And so, as I'm writing my books, I have that in my head. I have what I went through in my head. I have these things that I've learned in my head, that stuff, that's not okay. That is not who Jesus is. That's not why he came. That's not what Christianity is about. And so my work has evolved because I have evolved.
That makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like there's been a lot that's happened and a lot that you've gone through in terms of your journey.
That's why it took 2 years to get this book out instead of one. I took a hiatus. I had a couple things going on.
Well, sometimes it's like that where life happens. And I think sometimes when life happens, it can get like when it comes to our faith and then how we're relating to our faith communities and everything like that, how things get more complex.
Yeah. Well, I was worried too. I was afraid to give, thinking that I might have to give up writing because I would be shunned from my Christian writer friends and from the Christian readers, because I was afraid that I would be shunned for being gay and that no one would take my work seriously anymore, and that I would be viewed as somebody who's living in sin and, and all this stuff. And I think there's going to be probably chunks of people that do view me that way. And I think what I've learned so far, apart from my church that excommunicated me, and including my former best friend not accepting, and some Christian writer friends who, were not really super close friends, but who kind of also have rejected me in that way. Mostly, though, people have been pretty great and happy for me that I am living my authentic self, and I believe now more than ever that God loves me just as I am. And so I think hearing that from my writer friends, and it's so funny because it was actually my secular writing friends that were like, don't give up. My editor, she said, you're going to write some books and that they're going to give people hope, because I also plan to write, lesbian Christian fiction and like as another, some books. I have a book in mind already. What Maggie, my editor, said was someone's going to read a work that I have from being gay and from being a Christian. And she said it was going to save someone's life. And I know that's true because people kill themselves all the time because of this stuff. And so, I think that just, I'm like, yes, you're right. I have to keep going. I can't give it up. And that's why, I've edited this book, and that's why I'm going to publish it. It's not, this one doesn't necessarily talk about, LGBTQ plus people. Not that the readers know about yet. More to come in book 3 and 4 or whatever it'll be, the shoot off of it. But, even if you feel like people are going to shun you as long as you know that this is what God wants you to do, you just got to keep going.
That's so true. And honestly, I hear this. So first of all, I'm sorry that you had to go through all the things that you've gone through to get to this point.
Right.
Because I can't imagine how that would be.
Mm-hmm. It was hard.
At the same time, I'm happy that you're living in your truth. And that's the thing, that's so important to be able to, well, number one, be safe. Put yourself in a position where you and your son are safe.
Yeah.
And I would imagine that aspect, there's some inspiration from that goes into finding Seguridad.
Yes.
And then also being able to be honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As far as your sexual orientation and who you love,
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And that's a good thing. Yeah, last year I did a 2-part series on sexual orientation and Christianity. The first was specifically talking about sexual orientation,
mm-hmm.
and the second part was on gender identity.
Oh, cool.
And I talked about how with sexual orientation, I focused on, I'm sure you're familiar with the clobber verses.
Right, yeah. I did a whole lot of reading as I was coming out. I read a lot of books, like What the Bible Really Says About Homosexuality, which was like a very thick theological book. I read God and the Gay Christian. I read Torn. I read Undivided. I read, what did I not read more? I think, Shameless by Nadia Bolz-Weber. Oh, that was a good one too.
Yeah, she's good. Yeah. But
Yeah,
yeah,
clobber verses, yeah.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, like and that was the thing, like I went through and talked about the different clobber verses and some of the background and like just how like the interpretations have changed over time.
Right.
And how this current interpretation that talks about like homosexuality is, when you look at the historical timeline, it's a relatively recent way that it's been interpreted.
It was like the 1800s, and then even in 1980, they made more changes in the certain Bibles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so I mean, the point I'm making, I guess, is just that within churches there are these immutable truths.
Right.
And I say that with air quotes. This idea that like, okay, this is how it is. This is how it's always been. And, that's not necessarily true. And I think sometimes it's easier to hold on to that orthodoxy, or I don't even know if I would even call it that, because of it being probably more recent than people think. But holding on to these viewpoints that at the end of the day are not loving, are not like at the core of what Jesus wants for us and how Jesus wants for us to relate to each other.
Exactly. And it's just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, this issue was the thing that, I mean, of all the issues, racism, other types like bigotry, so on and so forth, the thing that pushed me into getting away from evangelicalism, like I'm still a Christian, but I don't consider myself an evangelical.
Right.
The tipping point was this issue.
Right. Yeah. I think, yeah, it's a very hot button issue, and one side is very set on that, and the other side is very set. I mean, right now I'm going to a Methodist church, so I went back to my roots.
Right.
And the Methodist church itself is divided. Now the church I'm in is like the best church ever. I love it. It's called Rise. I love it so much. There's
awesome.
I love it so much. Like, and I went in, there's only been 2 times in my whole life where I have felt the calm peace that I feel like God has given me, where I'm like, this is where I'm supposed to be. This is where I'm meant to be. The first time was when I walked into the grad school that I decided to go to. It was like number 5 on my list, but I walked in and I felt this overwhelming sense of peace, and like, this is where I needed to be. And the other time that happened is when I went to Rise for the first time. I walked in and I just felt it. I felt like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I'm so glad that I went. I went before I stopped going to my other church, because I talked to this pastor named Debbie somewhere in Iowa. I somehow I had contacted her about a podcast in like 2017 or something, and I somehow in the back of my brain. It's so weird how things happen like this, Somehow in the back of my brain, I remember seeing a thing like on her signature thing that said LGBTQ plus affirming. And when I was going through my stuff, and I was like, I felt like, how can I still be a Christian if I'm gay? Because I'm like, I'm pretty sure I'm gay. Like, like I'm just, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I'm gay. So because I'd been doing journaling at that point, I was like 50,000 words in. It was a big journal. And
well, you say you like to write.
I do like to write. That's right. So, but like, I mean, so I contacted her, and I was like asking for a friend. What are some resources? So she gave me all those books that I mentioned, and I started reading them, and I was like, and I prayed to God. After I read them, I prayed, and I said, God, is this how you made me? And I felt, he said yes. And that's when I accepted it. That's when I accepted that I was gay. And then the journey was, well, what do I do about this? Where am I going after this? What does that even mean? And it was a very scary time. I had panic attacks. It was a very scary time to not know what was going on. And then to be realizing what's happening that I was in an abusive marriage along with that was just so much stress and anxiety all at once. And so she said, if you ever wanted to talk, I could call. And so I was like, that might be good. And I had also set up therapy, because therapy is good. Everybody should do it. I'm a therapist, yes. So I'm biased. But like, so, I had one session of therapy, And then there was a snowstorm. And so I was calling Pastor Debbie the day before my next therapy session. And thank goodness, because there was a snowstorm and my next session was canceled. So it was bad. I had finally opened my mouth to say, I think I might be gay out loud for the first time to anybody. And it was so scary, And so with Pastor Debbie, I said the same thing, and she was so loving. And she said, at my church, which is 90% LGBTQ plus, that a lot of people go to both churches at once. And so that was what got me to go to Rise and to start to realize and to see other people like myself that could be fully participating in church and it's like you were just loved exactly as you were. Doesn't matter, no holds barred, anything. And it was so beautiful to be in a space like that where you were just loved for exactly how you were in that exact moment. And I feel like everybody needs something like that. And I don't know why I started in this realm, but that's where I'm at right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's and that's the thing. It's awesome to be able to in the midst of trying to figure everything out and being able to find a community that accepts you.
Exactly.
That's so important.
I think it is. And so, I mean, I think that's how I'm going into my writing this time. Part of it is me realizing that I needed to love myself, and you'll see some of that echoed into the book. Part of it is also the book really speaks heavily about systemic racism, which is another journey I've been on, learning about that as well. In the book, Lauren and Peter kind of are starting to realize about systemic racism and doing because they're around people of color, and I think one of the things that happens with white people, like I myself am white, is that we are insular without realizing it a lot of times, and there's an entire other world happening that we have no idea is happening, and it's so crazy when you are. I think that's. I mean, I don't think it's cool for me to say woke, but I think that's, I mean, when I think, so I say awakened because I don't want to take on a term, but I mean, it is very accurate because all of a sudden you have awakened, you are woke to this world that you had no idea was happening all around you all the time. And you're like, how was I so blind? And so that's kind of what's happening in the book with Lauren and Peter. They are their eyes are opened. They have been awakened. They're woke now, They're like, what is this? And it's so scary. It's very overwhelming to be in that moment and to be there. And I think, people, that happens. I've seen that happen to a lot of my friends. They're like, children in cages, how is that a thing? And I'm like, that's been a thing.
Yeah.
Or like what? Black people being murdered by cops? And I'm like, that's also been a thing.
Yeah.
But you don't know it until you know it, until you see it, until you meet people, until you watch videos, until you watch movies, until you read books, until you are learning and you allow yourself to open your eyes. You have no idea that stuff's happening. And then when you do, you're like, oh, crap, I'm going to use nicer words. Oh no, how is this happening in the world? This isn't the world that I thought I knew. What do I do? And so for Lauren and Peter, when we're talking about finding seguridad, finding safety or security, right now that's where their feeling of chaos is because the world as they knew it is no longer as they knew it. And then for Carlos, his family has been ripped away from him, and so he's feeling chaos as well. Anna and Emmanuel are feeling chaos for the fear for their lives and all this stuff. And it's like, how do you find safety? Where do you go for that? And I feel that deeply because that's been the last year and a half of my life, having all these realizations and seeing where you're at and opening your eyes to things is really scary.
Your new book, Finding Seguridad. Seguridad means safety or security in Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's the second installment of your series, Buscando Home, The first being Finding Amor, which was a riveting read. I enjoyed it. My husband enjoyed it too.
Awesome.
You've talked a little bit, in our conversation about finding Seguridad. Are there any themes within the book that you say are unique to this installment?
Looking into the systemic racism is one of the main themes. Also, because, like I said, they're having this awakening, Lauren and Peter, that they're realizing this is happening. And for me, as a person that I'm on this journey of awakening as well to systemic racism, and what do I do about it? Side note, I just took this really awesome anti-racism course. It was so good. And so, like, you just keep learning. It's like you can't learn enough. You just keep learning more and more things about what's going on. And I feel like that's where Lauren, she kind of started there a little bit, and Finding Amor. She's at the after school program, and she sees all these kids, and she's never really been in contact with kids from, like, Muslim children or people from refugees or people that don't speak English, and it's very uncomfortable for her. But she gets all this love from them, and she realizes, like, she goes into it like wanting to help. It's kind of that white savior thing,
Right.
that happens all the time. And what she finds is that actually, like, they helped more than she helped them. And I think that's often the case. It was like, she didn't know the impact that being in their lives was going to have on her. And I think that's kind of a continuation of that into Finding Seguridad, because she's around Emmanuel and Ana a lot more, and her eyes are continuing to be open. I'm just thinking about one scene in particular. She's going with Emmanuel to a hardware store to get a present for Peter, and Emmanuel, who's 8, he's just there. He's looking at the, I don't know, some birdhouses or something, and Lauren realizes one of the clerks has been following Emmanuel around and watching him, and she's like, and he goes, don't touch that. That's really expensive, and or something like that. I can't remember exactly how it starts, but she's like, he's a very responsible little kid, and the guy's like, oh, well, you have to keep your eyes on kids like him, and she flips out, and because it's just, she's never seen anything like that before. It's not something that's in her world, and all she knows is Emmanuel's this little kid that she loves, and for someone to judge him like that, when they go out to the car, Emmanuel's like, it's fine, you don't need to make a big scene like this, and or something, he's like, this happens all the time, and she, like, breaks down because she just doesn't, that's not the world she lives in. She didn't know that was happening. And so there's things like that just kind of happen in the story that where she's just realizing what's going on with people of color. And I think some of that's happening in our world right now, where people are waking up and realizing that systemic racism is a legit thing that's happening, with everything with the Black Lives Matter, it becoming a bigger movement. I live 1 hour from Charlottesville. On Juneteenth, my girlfriend and I drove through Richmond past the Stonewall Jackson Monument. Or Robert E. Lee. I don't know which one. I'm sorry. I'm really bad. One of the Confederate monuments.
Yeah.
And the one that was central and had been tagged, and there was, like, a whole thing there, and it was very powerful to see it being taken back. And it's down now. They took it down, I think. It was a huge thing, like a giant, huge thing. And so, as this is happening and people are realizing it, I don't know, it just fit. That was already in the story, and it kind of worked out well. That's kind of, Lauren is also having that realization. So that's one of the themes. Another theme is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, which Emmanuel has from his upbringing and from the stuff that's happening with Carlos, his crossing over the border and being, and his immigration experience, kind of camp, or however you want to say it. And so he's got all this PTSD stuff. I tried to make it as authentic as possible in someone that had read my book, who is a survivor of childhood trauma, said that she liked how authentic it was and how I got it right, how kids react. It made me sad for her, of course. I already knew that about her, but
Right.
glad that I had captured that correctly in an authentic way. And one of the people that come back in this book is Sandra, who is Manuel's grandmother and Ana's mother. And so Sandra was in the Guerra Civil, the war in the Civil War in El Salvador. She was in El Salvador when this horrific war was happening, and so she has PTSD, and that's why she left Ana. That's why she left El Salvador and left Ana behind and never went back, because her PTSD overtook her and she got into substances and stuff. And so Sandra kind of comes back into the story in this book, and she's going to be. She even has her. This is a little like fun reader fact. In book 3, she's going to have her own point of view, so that's exciting.
Oh, neat.
And so she has PTSD. Emmanuel has PTSD, and she has learned how to treat hers, and so she can also kind of give some wisdom to Ana and to Emmanuel. And so I'm excited about that part. I really like Sandra. She's a sleeper character from book 1 that I was like so excited to bring back.
Awesome. Has the current political and social climate for Latino immigrants and Latino Americans generally informed your current book? I mean, it sounds like it has. Is there anything you want to expand as far as that? Or you want to expand on that a little bit?
I mean, I think that it's a continuation. If anybody's read other books of mine, Vivir el Dream or Finding Amor, they both talk about undocumented immigrants and the struggles of that. And I think Finding Seguridad it has the same stuff going on. Ana, is afraid to call the police. She's afraid that Carlos is going to, find them and kill them, but she also is afraid to call the police because he has documents and she doesn't. And that happens a lot, And so that's just one example. And one of my readers said, I never have thought about how people would be afraid to call the police for that. And that's something I hear all the time when I talk to my friends who are undocumented or talk to my clients that are undocumented, is that fear of calling because, what if you call the police for help and then they end up, deporting you from your family? And because that stuff happens,
Yeah.
That's no joke. That's the same similar reason why people of color, just like, especially like African Americans don't want to call or Black Americans don't want to call the police is because if you call the police, like, what if you get shot? It's that what if the person that's supposed to help you instead does the opposite? It's scary. So I think, it's similar in that realm, that what does being undocumented mean? How does that affect how you, what you do when you're in a situation like Anna's in?
Like, I don't know how it is to be undocumented or an immigrant, period. But yeah, like that, when you talked about what goes through your head when calling the police, that's something that as a Black American, I can identify with that uncertainty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's really scary.
Yeah.
It's not something that I have ever had to worry about, and that's one of those, that's white privilege right there. I haven't ever had to think twice if I needed to call the police. And yeah, I think that a lot of white people don't think about that. And that's one of my hopes when I write books, is that, one, that sometimes people will see themselves in my book and they'll say, hey, there's books about people like me.
Yeah.
Or maybe they'll say, oh, I had no idea this was happening because I read something where they did studies. Probably, I'm going to say Harvard just because I don't know where it was really, but they did scientific research someplace, some fancy school, and they found that reading fiction actually increases your empathy, especially when reading about other cultures, because you are putting yourself, generally speaking, when you read fiction, you really get into it. You get into the characters. You're like in there. You're like, you've got an iron in the fire now. Like thinking like Harry Potter, when Dumbledore, you're like, Dumbledore, that's like my father almost.
Like you can see the pieces
Harry,
that are,
everything.
Yeah.
You get invested. You're invested, and so like empathy. You get you're like, wait, but why is this, like, this is what happened with Maybe I Had a Dream. They're like, but what about Linda? What's going to happen? Like, why did that happen? I didn't know this was happening. We need to figure something out. Why is this happening in the world? And I was like, oh, good. Like, people,
Yeah.
It's something that's exciting for me, and a hope that I have is that at least one person, is going to read it. If it's just one person, that's fine, but at least one person's going to read it. And they're going to be like, whoa. And it's going to open their eyes to stuff, and they're going to open their heart. And that's kind of my hope for writing my books.
So I know that immigrants and immigration issues, that's near and dear to your heart.
It is.
It's not just like you've talked the talk, you've walked the walk as well.
Mm-hmm.
You've been involved with rallies and events supporting immigrants in your community.
Yes.
Now, we're in 2020, and 2020 is something else.
Sure is.
Yeah. And so, like, my question is, like, from what you've seen, heard, or experienced, how has 2020 with COVID-19, with the actions of the current president and the U.S. government in regards to immigration, how has all that, at least from what you've seen and experienced, affected the Latino community in your region?
It's really hard in a lot of different ways. I'm seeing it in a few different things. Like, I think just in general, things that are going on with Black Lives Matter, or also just the hatred toward people of color from the Trump administration. There's almost like three main groups that people seem to hate a lot in terms of people of color, like when it's on the Trump side of things, which is like Black, Mexicans, and Muslims. They're like the worst of the worst in their eyes. And so it's very scary to be a person from one of those three communities right now. There's a huge fear factor close by in town. That there's been two times. Like, okay, so I live in Harrisonburg, where we had a really awesome Black Lives Matter kind of quiet. It was like a silent march, and I saw video. I didn't go because I found out about it like 30 minutes before it was happening. I was like, no, it would have been cool. I was a little scared, though. I will admit that, like, because the stuff had gone down in all the other places too. That I was like, oh, pepper spray. It's a little scary. But there was a silent march. It was peaceful. There were some people that were not nice to them, but overall it went well. And in the county where we live, there's been other Black Lives Matters kind of protests or kind of demonstrations and stuff where white nationalists have come and made a giant thing. I just heard about, I think it was Elkton, which is in the county near me. They had like the students, and it was students from the high school. Same thing with like one in Broadway, where it was the same thing. It's like just part of the county, which is kind of more country, more rural. I mean, it happens in the cities, but also like in the county, there's more racism sometimes, or at least more out of overt racism.
They're more willing to share that. That's how they are.
And so, in Elkton, at least this is what I heard about from my anti-racism course, that just a group of students of color from the high school gathered for Black Lives Matter. And I guess on the nationalist like Facebook pages or something, they were like, the fascists are coming to town. You need to rally and come and save your country. And a bunch of white nationalists showed up with like machine guns, AK-47 and everything, and surrounded the group.
Oh, no.
And that was just like 30 minutes from where I live. It's like 10 minutes from where my mom lives. That's the kind of sentiment that's happening right now. And I'm sure, because right in this area, we have a higher Hispanic population it's like 16% Latino in the city, at least. And then the Black population is probably closer to like 5% or something.
Okay.
And in the county, it's a lot whiter, but still, I think there's more Latino. So I'm guessing that there was a lot of both Black and brown, kind of, as it would say, people of color, mostly, probably even more Latino. So I think it's scary. They just were having like a very peaceful protest, I think, with signs, and then people show up with like AK-47s. That's some scary stuff right there.
Oh yeah.
Also, right now, like with COVID, we have a huge percentage of our population of Latinos, and we have a lot of people from Iraq, so the Iraqi population, and because we have a refugee resettlement office over here, so a lot of the Latinos and it's also a very high number of Black people as well. People of color are, especially from those three groups, are having more cases of COVID than white, and it's because of the poultry plants generally, and because they have to keep working, and the administration doesn't let them socially distance, because they need to get all that turkey out so we can eat it. Like it's so stupid. One of my clients from the Iraqi community said like all of the Iraqi community, like so many families were sick with children, and just like a lot of people had COVID-19, and it had torn through the Muslim community in our area because of, I think, a lot of them work in the poultry plants, or in the plants where you're in tight spaces and you can't socially distance. And it's so I think that it being kind of I don't like the equity, being unequal like that is one of the things that COVID has affected in that way. Also, right now with like going back to school, generally, while there are a lot of people of color that are in the middle class, upper middle class realm, because of all the systemic racism, a lot of them are in the kind of more lower poverty levels, which generally means they need to go to work. They have to have, and maybe both parents need to work. They don't have maybe the resources to be a stay-at-home mom or dad. And now everything is going virtual. It's a virtual school. So how does your kid learn? How does your kid advance in a graded system where there's going to be SOLs and everything? How does your child learn when they're going to be at like a babysitter with all these other kids? When they're at a daycare setting? Maybe where you don't even have internet access at your house. I can see that already. It's not even started yet, and I can just see the inequality starting already. So those are the ways I see it kind of. Also, if the parents don't speak English, that's another thing too. How are they supposed to help the kids with the assignments and getting online when maybe, you're from a rural place or something, or, even if you're not, like, and you do speak English, like, it's a tricky thing to figure out.
I can't imagine. Yeah. There are many listeners who also care deeply about immigration issues, as well as the targeting and marginalization of the Latino immigrant community, but they might not know what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest might be some particular actions that we could take, or perhaps groups that we can support?
I would say, I have found that looking into like some grassroots organizations in your area are good. I'm no longer a part of it, and I feel bad because I just wasn't able to attend meetings. I still get the emails, but I was part of Virginia organizing, and I'm guessing there is stuff like that for different states. In Virginia, there's a thing called Virginia Organizing, which is a grassroots movement that kind of goes in and says, we need more equity in these areas, and also gives information to communities that need a way to get the information to them, or may not know about certain things. And so I would recommend kind of looking into the grassroots organizations in your area. And also, there's things like you can look up hashtags maybe called for abolish ICE or defund ICE, I think, are two things. I think abolish ICE is the main one. So it's abolish and an ICE with the big capitals. And that is, you could probably learn if your local area has a contract with ICE, the immigration enforcement thing, where anybody who is undocumented, if they get into the local jail for any infraction, they will get deported. They call ICE, and they just come in and they sweep it. They sweep the jail.
Mm-hmm.
And right here in our area, we have we have an ICE presence.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of years, they went in and they swept the poultry plants. And several years ago, I remember my ex explaining that he was at work, and ICE came in, and I mean, there was a lot of people that were undocumented working there at that time, and that people just ran. He said that he watched them and they were climbing over the fences to get out. It was sad. So I mean, just like,
Yeah.
ICE, it's not a good thing. So abolish ICE, I think, would be a good hashtag to learn about things in your area. Because if that's in your area, that's doing a lot of harm to immigrants.
Yeah.
Who wants to call the police if you're going to get deported?
Right.
If they take both of you into custody and then you're in there and you're gone.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in Cincinnati, where I live, so the city is a sanctuary city, but then the county contracts with ICE. So
yeah,
it's
it might
like,
be the same thing here.
yeah. So it's kind of, it's sort of like a weird thing. So it's like, okay, it's sort of a sanctuary city, but not really because of the
Right.
county. And I mean, the county jail is in downtown Cincinnati. So,
Right.
yeah. So it's, yeah.
Ours is the county jail. It's in the middle of the city. Is that what you said for yours too?
Yeah. It's, yep, it's downtown Cincinnati. Like the,
so that's
Hamilton
where everyone
County Jail.
goes in ours. There's no other jail. It's the Rockingham County Jail. I just had another thought. You can also support local businesses that are Latino or, immigrant based. And that's a great way to support local immigrants. Go to your local taco trucks. Ask around if people know of like markets or tiendas, you can go to. Learn about your city. Learn about where you live, your town. There's going to be places that you probably don't know about, and you can support those places instead of going to like McDonald's or like, another giant corporation. You can go to like a small place, and there's probably a lot less people there. So it's like, less COVID exposure. And two, you're helping out like a mom and pop store, but for immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm definitely like on the support local train. That's something that we're really passionate about. I can't speak for other places, but I know here in Cincinnati, a number of local restaurants and retailers are owned by immigrants.
Yeah, there's a lot. So I think you just look around, and I think one thing that I try to be aware of, because I do like to write a lot of angst. My girlfriend always like jokes with me about that I love angst, which is so true. I love my angst. But also like celebrating the wonderful things about cultures too,
Oh, yeah.
Finding the fun things. And, you can learn a lot of stuff. Music, culture, food, art. There's a whole lot of wonderful things just out there that if you don't know about it, you don't know until you know.
Right. Yeah, like there's a whole world that is in our backyard.
Exactly. And you don't have to be in a giant city to find it. You can just ask around and learn all this cool stuff that you just don't even know about. And if you are in a big city, gosh, you have a lot of things you can find out.
Oh, yeah. So when do you anticipate finding Seguridad will be out?
Well, I'm hoping October timeframe. I don't know the exact release date yet. And the pre-order, when you put up this podcast, will be up on Amazon, so you can pre-order it.
Let's talk a little bit about what is next for you.
Okay, well, I have already written Finding Paz, which is the word for peace. And that is the third book in the Buscando Home series, finishing out the trilogy. And I can't really give any spoilers, but they may or may not find peace. And so that's gonna wrap it up, and maybe like I don't like nice little bows. If you've read Dream,
yeah.
But it's at least
life
wrapped
isn't
up.
like that, and that's one thing I like about your stuff. Is like it's realistic in that way.
So it's not gonna be a nice little bow, but it's gonna be interesting. That's for sure. First draft was a hoot. I enjoyed writing it. It was great, and so I'm excited to edit book 3 and finish out the series. And then I have a 4th story brewing that I'm going to be writing in November during NaNoWriMo, which is maybe all the genres. It's like a lesbian Christian romance with also a Latina in it. It's too many genres to put on Amazon, probably. But like,
I'm sure you'll figure it out.
I know I'll figure it out. But I'm really excited for that story. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm really excited for that story. And then just as like a side note, as of another giant series that I've written, I've also written a children's series called Prince Miguel and His Journey Home, based on my I started it in the NICU with my son, and it's just like a really awesome fantasy series, kind of, I think, middle grade novel, and that's something that I'm getting excited about working on that as well. It's kind of cute because it's been a while since I've written them. Like, I think I wrote them, I think it was 2015, 16, and 17. And so my son now, as I put him to bed every night, he'll say, "Tell me more about Prince Miguel." And so I'll tell him a little bit of the stories, like, every night. And so that's just something that I've been doing. And so I want to work on those as well. But I think first I'm going to be finishing up this trilogy and, working on that lesbian romance that I'm excited about as well.
So how can listeners reach out to you?
Well, I am on Facebook. I have an author page. It's Allison K. Garcia, author. I'm also under that same in Instagram. It's Allison K. Garcia, author, the writer on Twitter. And I have a newsletter that you can figure out how to sign up for if you go on my my Facebook author page. And I have a Facebook group as well called Readers and Dreamers, where I'm going to have an online launch party in October sometime. So yeah, you can get a little bit of all those different things. And I'm, that you can email me once you're signed up for my newsletter. You can always email me. You can contact me on my Facebook author page or Instagram. Twitter, I'm a little bit more hit or miss on, but I would say those are the best ways to reach out to me. And I'm always happy to talk to my readers.
Awesome. Allison, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Well, I've enjoyed talking with you as always, and I hope that your listeners enjoy it as well.
Oh, I'm sure they will. And I'm glad that you came on.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to Potstirrer Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, subscribe for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or on your favorite podcast app. Go to potstirrerpodcast.com/download, and links to the podcast on various apps are listed right there. If you subscribe, new episodes will download once they come out, so you don't have to wait. If you enjoyed the podcast, please give it 5 stars and leave a review on your choice app. And my second house is Twitter, apparently, so follow me there at PotstirrerCast. I'm Jay Poole. Let's fight for America's future, because freedom is not free.